Good morning. Let us now discuss the plays of Mahesh Elkanchwar. But before we move to the first play under discussion, which would be called, which is called Garbo, let me give you an introduction to the playwright's life and some of his major engagements with theatre. Mahesh Elkanchwar, born in 1939, belonged to a generation of playwrights who satirized the corruption and estrangement of urban life. But what distinguished Elkanchwar from the others was the fact that his critique of urban life was from the perspective of a small town immigrant. He was born in a Telugu Brahmin family that had migrated to Vidarbha district in Maharashtra. He completed his matriculation, undergraduate and postgraduate studies in Nagpur University, and it was in Nagpur that he was first exposed to Marathi theatre, which led him to then pen several plays. He taught English literature in a college in Nagpur, but he wrote his plays in Marathi. And Vijay Tendulkar is said to have had an impact on his work. He experimented with a variety of forms from expressionist to absurdist theatre. He also wrote several essays that elaborated his opinions on theatre. In an essay called Notes on Theatre, which has been translated and which is a part of the translation of his collected plays published by Oxford University Press, Elkanchwar lays out his perspective of theatre and what he believes is the form and function of theatre. He emphasizes the importance of experience, indeed the very experience of life in theatre. The experience of theatre is impeded, he says, when playwrights place exclusive importance on meaning. Elkanchwar criticizes playwrights who predetermine the meaning of the play through their excessive use of words that make meaning explicit and unidimensional. Free space within the text becomes important in this regard. Right? So, in his own words, Mahesh Elkanchwar says that this space, this free space within the text, is filled by multiple possibilities of experience that an actor has to embody and realize through his acting. Elkanchwar then recounts his very bitter experience with his friends and peers who did not understand his theatre that they thought was too bourgeois and middle class in the way it was about the private realm or the private pain of the individual. He wonders if the individual wonders if the individual has to be pitted against or subordinated to the socio-political concerns of society at large. Right? Does there have to be a hierarchy of theatres, one which is more invested in the social and economic concerns of society at large, and the other which is about the privations of the individual? Does there have to be a hierarchy of theatres? He wonders if art and ideology have to be incompatible. And he doesn't consider himself as someone who has used theatre for ideological purposes. He probably identifies himself more as someone who is more invested in the artistic form of the play without explicitly engaging in any kind of ideological propaganda. But he sees Kanhaiyalal, the very important, significant Manipuri theatre practitioner, Kanhaiyalal's theatre, as a perfect blend of ideology and art. He wonders if art and ideology have to be seen as polar opposites in theatre. Is there a way in which ideology does not completely supersede or suppress art, the artistic form of the play, right? So it's important to not ignore the artistic form of the play when it comes to using or theatre as a codified form of political language, right? So for example, he says that emotion has become taboo. To express emotion has become taboo unless it gets the sanctity and legitimacy of the cause that this particular form of political theatre is championing, right? So does everything have to be legitimized? Everything have to be instrumentalized to cater to a political purpose? So he tries to dismiss and challenge these charges of elitism that come with the rather kind of familiar debate now between art for art's sake and art for society's sake, right? So, is art for art's sake completely divorced from any kind of ideology, any kind of political purpose, even if it is not explicit? Is it a socially irresponsible, morally irresponsible form of theatre, or is it possible to actually completely blur or do away with this hierarchy between art for others' sake and art for society's sake and art for art's sake, and think of marrying the two in some sense? In trying to think about a new artistic form of theatre which is not compromised by or separable from the political message, if any, that it is trying to communicate and convey. So he's very clear in the intentions with which he writes theatre. So he says in the same essay, Notes on Theatre, he says that when I write, I expect a personal response from my reader or viewer and not a conditioned reflex which is always a result of the preconceived codification of life. Although I have felt close to certain ideologies at various stages in my life, I have always been convinced that no ideology is greater than life itself. If I am not using theatre as a weapon, if it is a means of self-expression for me, my writing will concern itself with life as I experience it and not with doctrine. As Ionesco says, any work of art which is ideological and nothing less would be pointless, tautological, inferior to the doctrine it claims to demonstrate. An honest writer writes from a very private core of his being, which is beyond the control of intellect, and so a major part of his perception is often subjective. It is to this that the reader or viewer has to respond in the same spirit. So the emphasis here is on the subjective experience of writing and performing theatre, which is really about the experience of life itself and not about any particular doctrine. Because to then substitute one doctrine for another, to think of also art, the art of theatre, as a doctrine is also to then engage in a very self-defeating exercise where you just try and substitute, if not politics, some kind of political propaganda or ideology with art, right? As though art were in itself a doctrine or an ideology. He says later on in the same essay, no ideology can liberate us from the pain of living and fear of death or our thirst for the absolute. Art tries to transcend tangible reality and aspires to journey into an unnameable, indefinable reality that is constantly pulsating beneath the topical. It cannot limit itself only to concrete ideological thinking. When a writer writes, he writes about the subjective man who is the epicenter of his experience. That is why an individual's private pain is as important as the pain of a mass of humanity and can also be easily shared as a universal experience. Right? So he's trying to also blur the very distinction between individual pain and collective pain, because individual pain can also be easily shared as a universal experience. And later on, he also goes on to talk about the importance of the poetic, of how important the poetic is in theatre. And of course, again, thinking of the poetry as an experience, as a sublime experience of literary language, and not necessarily explicitly poetry as such, but yes. A use of literary language which does not involve too many words, but is also, amenable to the experience of acting, of embodying language, with its minimal words, with minimal verbosity, in terms of trying to execute space through the actor's body. So this is his thoughts on Indian theatre. So coming to the first play that will be discussed by Mahesh L. Kanchwar, which belongs to the early phase of his career as a playwright. It's called Garbo. Garbo is an early play by Mahesh L. Kanchwar that instantiates his engagement with the significance of life itself. It portrays three young men from Nagpur who are isolated and bored with urban life in Mumbai. Srimant is a wealthy businessman. Pansy, a young self-indulgent adolescent who has left his parents, and Intuk, a professor who pontificates on the meaning of art and life. Garbo is a petty film actress in B-grade movies who's also constructed as an aesthetic ideal for the men trapped in their sitting room. For the men, Garbo is a challenge. For Pansy, for the men, Garbo is a challenge. For Pansy, a mother figure. And for Intuk, an inexhaustible aesthetic ideal. They all use her for their own desire to transcend themselves, but their private images of Garbo are often undermined by Garbo's bitter comebacks and self-contempt. When they suddenly discover she is pregnant, it fills each man with a new sense of purpose and salvation that would free them from their petty and insular worlds, although they do not wish to embrace the responsibilities that would come with it, and each hopes that they are the father, that he is the father of the child who will inherit their names. So let's look at the play itself. This is just a brief overview of the play. You have a fairly simple setting, which is a sitting room furnished in a casually luxurious style. There's an intellectual Intuk, the professor, who's relaxing, puffing on a cigarette, while Pansy, the adolescent, is twiddling the knobs of a radio. And you can make out that there's a sense of tedium. There's a mood that's created of tedium and boredom, and these men don't know how to spend time, what to do with themselves in Bombay. So Pansy tells Intuk, do you know what I used to do back home? There's no radio there, so I'd go and stand in front of the pawn shop or the cafe, or barge straight into the barber's, listen to the songs for a while and then beat it, pretending there's too much of a rush. Of course, in those days it was only Hindi songs for me. But English songs are the greatest. I'd never heard them before I came here, and now it's nothing but. Intuk, I don't seem to enjoy even classical music these days. Do you know, Pansy, in the old days, just a single tan fluttering somewhere on the distant breeze was enough to give me goose flesh. And of course, listening to the real thing would bring me to tears and all. Strange, bloody experience. Then later on, Intuk says, now Intuk is a professor who's constantly commenting on the artifice, the fakeness of people in the city, of how he notices, for example, people who throng, elite folks who throng the performance spaces of the city and pretend to understand and appreciate Hindustani music. Right. So when he goes to what Pansy calls the stuffy concerts, Intuk says that you should see the crowds that come there. God knows where the bastards buy all the enthusiasm. The vocalist, male or female, sits under the arch of two tanpuras like some deity. They go crazy about their own marvelous voices, belching out with sublime ardor at all those sublime idiots sitting out front with their overdressed, simpering idiot wives. That's why I clap the longest and the loudest at the end of every song. Alone, of course, and with this terrific solemn face. And people think this chap's a great lover of music. It's a real laugh. So obviously he's himself trying to pretend to be a great connoisseur of Hindustani music, while he's actually sitting there observing the pretentiousness of these other people who have come to watch the concert. And later on, Intuk says, after all, I'm a professor. I'm supposed to understand everything. Crap. Once you get yourself stamped professor, you can literally run amok. I'll tell you about people. Once I was clapping the skin off my hands when a baldy next to me says, wonderful Kaushi Kannada, wasn't it? I made my face even more dreadfully solemn and said, it wasn't Kaushi Kannada. It was Nayaki Kannada. So the chap turns to his dolled up wife and says, terrific Nayaki Kannada, isn't it? That's the way it is. So obviously he realizes that they're all pretending. They don't know anything at all. Those days are gone, kiddo, Intuk tells Pansy again, when you could enjoy music as a private pleasure. Nowadays, these musical conferences are an immense fraud perpetrated by the community upon the community. Everybody from the singers down to the listeners are under religious obligation to pretend to be intensely interested in art. They sing Mishra ragas, Saleh, Bachchu, try to sing simple, straightforward ragas first. But people are only too keen to outclap them. What more do you want, kid? You've got everything there except good music. You should come with me sometime. So this is his comment on the pretentiousness of the people in Mumbai who come to listen to Hindustani concerts. There's a deep sense of boredom and disillusionment with the pretense and artifice of urban life. We also learn later on that both these people, Intuk and Pansy, are living with Srimant, who's a wealthy businessman in Bombay. If Intuk is the professor who wants to constantly pontificate on the meaning of life, Pansy is a very restless and insecure adolescent who was rescued by Intuk and Srimant from committing suicide at a railway station by jumping in front of the train. So he abandons his parents, he can't live with them anymore. He comes in search of his own fortunes but loses hope. He's on the verge of committing suicide when he's rescued by Intuk and Srimant. So he's just 17. But Pansy already seems to be terribly bored of his life. And Intuk says, Pansy, 17 years old and bored, observe this youth, bored at 17. What will you be when you get to my age? So the play very intentionally has characters who belong to different age groups. One is young, one who's adolescent, one who's probably middle-aged, and one who's slightly older, Srimant and Intuk. And this is to show how people of different ages are equally disillusioned and bored by life in the city. So there's a deep sense of existentialist unease and isolation in the city. And Intuk himself reveals the fact that he's a poet. He writes poems, but he realizes that he is lacking originality. Perhaps his poems may have won him, instant fame, but then he realizes he only knows that his poetry is not original, right? That he is not able to produce anything original. He feels he is stunted as a poet, right? His creative abilities are stunted. So he says, and this talk of fame is utter crap. People are fools. They call you great, but you feel that way from within. Idiot. Think carefully before you answer. Pat, came the reply. You are not great. Then what is all this about? These stories and poems. They are a hoax, came the second answer. Why are you doing it? To become famous. Well, there's nothing wrong with wanting to become famous. But what exactly is fame? What does it mean? What are you when you are famous? Fame is a sort of pleasant allegation foisted upon your name. And that's when you put a stop to writing and all that sort of nonsense. Forget about the whole thing and wallow happily in boredom. But is that the end? Certainly not. People are worse frauds than you think. They start singing another tune. Here's a writer who knows when to stop. His single-minded devotion to art, blah, blah, blah. So, he is trapped between probably, having fame thrust upon him because of his stories and poems. But on the other hand, he realizes that he does not feel creative, he does not feel original from within. So the world may appreciate you as a creative writer, but if you don't feel that sense of creativity, it makes no difference. And so he also seems to be then trapped within this apparent sense of being a creative and famous poet and writer, and on the other hand, feeling utterly bored with himself and his own life. And this complete lack of meaning in life. And so what do you have if it's not this fakeness, this fake popularity, this fake fame which is foisted upon you? You have a deep sense of boredom and ennui with life itself. Pansy is bored, just like Intuk is bored, and he realizes that he is not an original writer. So he feels bored. And you have Srimant who enters, who is again an equally effete and failed man, right? He's a businessman. There are also plays, there are also performances being performed within this play where these three men play other characters or they play each other. But all these performances within the play are meant to again stage enact and dramatize the same sense of disillusionment and failure. Srimant, in the first performance within the play, performs a policeman who is charging these two people, Intuk and Pansy, with mouthing obscenities, right? So he says you're guilty of using impossibly clean language, shorn of all obscenity. In fact, just the opposite. The first charge is using absolutely pure, chaste language which has no obscenities in it, thus causing acute embarrassment to those who are in the habit of using abusive language. Charge number 2, you're both guilty of expressing contempt and disgust towards drinking, meat eating, smoking, opium, hemp and LSD. Number 3, instead of having a bit of fun with good-looking chicks and letting them go, you softly indulge in pure and sublime love. And in your attempts to remain celibate, you either soil your underwear at nights, against which habit the entire race of dhobis is soon going to launch a protest in the form of a demonstration, and you lock yourself in the toilet at odd hours of the day and night, causing great inconvenience to others. Right. So this is of course a dramatization of the kinds of moral and social values that society holds on to. That society is always torn between values of, let's say, teetotalism, of celibacy, of sexual morality, right, and of using a pure elite language which is shorn of all obscenities, and the unconscious desires that constantly operate within society, within people's minds, the kinds of desires they have for pleasure, for sexual pleasure, for pleasure that comes from the consumption of drugs and drinking and meat eating and so on. And Srimant himself is incapable of speaking in fluent English, so he makes constant English mistakes in his English, grammatical errors, for which Intuk has to step out of his role and play the professor, constantly checking and correcting his English. And of course, Intuk perhaps also stands in for Mahesh L. Kanchwar, because in the play, he is a leading literateur of Maharashtra. He's a Maharashtrian literary figure who teaches English and who also knows English. And of course, Srimant, pretending to be the police officer, says, I am a police officer, which is why my English has to be bad. Right? So, again making a comment on class differences between the anglicized reading and speaking public as opposed to the professional classes, the working classes, the police. Right. So this is a performance within the play which dramatizes the hypocrisy of social norms and social differences of class. And then of course Srimant pronounces the court's judgment, the court's verdict. Taking into consideration the serious nature of your crimes, the court has decided that gold medals shall be hung around your necks for each of the following charges: integrity, extensive scholarship, ardent selflessness, boundless philanthropy, humble service, burning patriotism, and unblemished character. Accused will then be made to sit in a cushy, flower-bedecked impala and driven all around the town to the accompaniment of a brass band. All at every square, pious suhagans, young married brides, wives, wearing traditional pearl nose ornaments will give them a hero's reception. Right? So again, you note the sarcasm of this, that they're all people who embody the very ideals of society, of nationalism, right? And they're going to be honored for that very service. So this performance kind of falls into some kind of ridicule and fun, and of course then they're again left as lifeless and bored as they were before the performance, right? So they're terribly bored. The liquor shops are shut on a Sunday. They don't know what to do with their time. They're all thinking of Garbo. The conversations between Intuk, Srimant and Pansy also in some sense echo Mahesh L. Kanchwar's own conversations and debates on theatre with his interlocutors, his peers. So again, there's a discussion between the three men in the play on why, for example, sentimentality or emotions are being ridiculed. Why are sentimentalists out of fashion, right? Why is sentimentality being ridiculed? Why is emotion taboo? And of course, Intuk, for example, is one of those intellectuals who is against any kind of expression of emotion on stage. So he says 10 years ago, the sentimentalists were a fashion, stuffing their handkerchiefs and their sari ends in their mouth and sobbing their bloody hearts out. On the stage, one female would ask another female for pickles or some such nonsense, and out there in the auditorium, the entire lot of fancily dressed females would collapse in spasms of grief. What a laugh, right? So there's a comment on the changing tastes among theatre audiences and directors of what they actually want to see on stage. It's no longer one of emotion, of heightened emotion on stage, but it's more an attempt to try and purge the theatre of emotion, of sentimentality, of excessive display of emotions. And there's a talk of Garbo, of how Pansy feels Garbo is a very rational woman, as someone who never seems to lose her emotional balance. And if you remember now, Garbo is a B-grade actress. She's somebody who performs someone else. She lives in a world of make-believe, right? And so again, you see actors who are playing something else in the play, right? So they're constantly trying to play themselves, but they're also playing someone else, right? So you have actors playing characters, in this case, in the play. right? So you're twice or thrice removed from any sense of reality, of what these actors may be as real human beings. The whole question of the self, of who is the authentic self, what is the truth of the self, remains a question in the play which is unanswered till the very end. So Srimanth constantly describes Pansy as someone who is a sex machine, right? He tells Pansy that in what way is Garbo great? Even though Pansy thinks of Garbo as a mother, as an exalted figure, as someone who is noble and great, Srimanth questions her greatness. He says her only business in life has been jumping from bed to bed. She's nothing but a sex machine. A sex machine, yes, a sex machine, and that's what he calls her. That she is someone who is promiscuous, having multiple affairs with many men, and also acting someone else, playing chaste women. So the irony, the hypocrisy in Garbo's life is between, let's say, the roles she plays of chaste Hindu wives and women on stage, in film, sorry, but at the same time having illicit affairs with many men. Intuk says, hold on Srimanth, you have made two statements in the last few seconds which are diametrically opposed to each other, completely contradictory. First you said Garbo is great in bed, then you said she's a sex machine. Now if she's a machine, she's devoid of emotions, and if she's devoid of emotions, she can't be great in bed. Right? So you see how Garbo in some sense also embodies the very idea of theatre, of what the function of theatre is. Is theatre supposed to actually exude, display emotions on stage, or is it supposed to be devoid of emotions, right? Similarly, Garbo. Is Garbo someone who is, if she's a sex machine, then she is by definition not someone who can display emotions on stage. She is purely mechanical in her actions, right? Or is she someone who, and therefore she cannot be great in bed. If, according to Intuk, somebody who is incapable of feeling cannot be good in bed. But if she's devoid of emotions, she can't be great in bed. So Srimanth is someone who seems to be completely against any kind of emotion. He doesn't associate lovemaking or the sexual act with any kind of intimacy. But for Intuk, Garbo is this inexhaustible aesthetic ideal. It's not like as though Garbo is in love with, it's not as though Intuk is in love with the real Garbo. We don't know who or what the real Garbo is, but she is projected as an aesthetic ideal for Intuk. So Intuk wants to intellectualize the Garbo as an aesthetic ideal who is inexhaustible. No matter how much or how far you get to know her, you sleep with her, you make love to her, you will never actually be able to exhaust the real Garbo, the Garbo that we know. Srimanth asks Intuk, do you think that Garbo is someone sacred and sublime? Because they are all sexually involved in Garbo, right? They're all physically involved with her. So he doesn't understand words like sacred and sublime. Right? What does it mean to be sacred? What does it mean to be sublime? Intuk says, well, does it really make any difference whether we call Garbo this or that? Names don't change things. Garbo will remain Garbo, while we will continue to search for the kind of Garbo we want. If we find her, well and good. If we don't, we will suffer a bit, or not even that after a while. So it's all about names. How do we make meaning out of life? By naming things, through the act of naming, through the act of nomination, of nomenclature. So if the name is a signifier, do signifiers signify something? Do they connote something? And does that make a difference to the way we perceive reality? How does language mediate or condition our perception of reality? Garbo will remain Garbo. I mean, we're actually not even talking about the real Garbo, but what does Garbo represent? What does Garbo stand in for us? Is she just an outlet for sexual desire, a form of trying to vent one's own frustration with the alienation of urban life through the sexual act, or is she an aesthetic ideal that remains inexhaustible and ever receding, right? She cannot actually be, so maybe perhaps she is also, as Alkanchwar himself says, perhaps a medium for Intuk's own art, the art of writing, the art of producing poetry and stories. I mean, do we need Garbo, something like an ideal to actually enable us to transcend our own limited selves in order to reach the unlimited, the absolute, the transcendental in life? Intuk says, then why do we try to define her? or any woman, or anything in the world for that matter. I think we should just lay back. Let Garbo be what she is. The important thing is to know what we are. If we do, that becomes a sound enough basis for our relationships with her. Later on, Srimant asks, Intuk, does a woman like Garbo ever become stale? No matter how many times you sleep with Garbo, does she ever go stale? And Intuk says, don't they? Sleep with a woman twice and you know her inside out. Intuk says, don't make foolish witticisms, please. All this business about woman being an enigma and all that is myth. A bit of literary stupidity, to tell you the truth. Once you've understood a woman, you don't want to look at her again. Once you've explored her, the thrill is gone. A woman should be able to satisfy you fully and yet withhold a part of herself from you. Right? So even though Intuk seems to dismiss many literary representations of woman as an inexhaustible ideal, he seems to in some sense also echo and duplicate that same, what he calls the same literary nonsense about representing a woman as someone who always withholds a part of herself, even as she is able to satisfy a man completely. So Intuk says, to put it in a nutshell, Garbo never becomes common. Even after fulfilling the needs of all three of us, a part of her still remains untouched. So Garbo is constantly oscillating between a woman who is an actual woman, a real woman, who is a B-grade actress, who sleeps around with many men, with film producers, with actors, directors, cameramen, but at the same time is also being salvaged as an ideal symbol of the aspirations of these men to overcome their own limited lives, their limited selves in the city of Bombay. We also see the kinds of perception, the way Garbo is perceived by these three men. Pansy, of course, puts Garbo on a pedestal as somebody who is a completely exalted figure, mother figure, sister figure. For Srimant, she's just a petty actress who sleeps around and someone who can help him overcome his own failed masculinity. We realize towards the end of the play that Srimant is actually impotent and emasculated, and is also secretly possesses, desires Pansy and wants Pansy for his own, in order to validate his own failed masculinity. And Garbo herself is someone who's trying to humor these men. She cannot put up with all the accusations. She tries to always, she's contemptuous of herself, of her own life as a B-grade actress, as somebody who's promiscuous. But at the same time, she's also trying to, she struggles to actually resist the charges against her by these men. So she's wedged between being a loose actress, a woman who sleeps around, a promiscuous woman, and someone who is an aesthetic ideal, an artistic ideal, who is again fixed and frozen, and whose role apparently is to inspire these men to create, to write, to rise above their limited selves. And then they also have another performance within the performance after Garbo enters, where Garbo is pretending to be the daughter of Intuk. Pansy and Srimant play each other, and Garbo is pretending to be daughter of a very pious man, a woman who loses her chastity, her virginity to another man, and ends up bearing his illicit child. And by the end of the play, the performance within the play, she's forced to kill the child. She's forced to commit infanticide and kill the illegitimate child because she never had any chastity in the first place, right? So she is not a pure chaste woman, the daughter of a respectable family, but has lost all her reputation because of this illegitimate child that she then has to kill and murder. So they are trying to imagine the reaction that their respectable neighbor Tatya, Tatya is this very pious and orthodox Maharashtrian neighbor of Srimant's, and they imagine how he would react if he overheard their conversations. So again, you see how the performances within the play again project woman as someone who's trapped between these two binaries, these two oppositions between chaste wife, mother figure, and the loose whore, right? So this is constant oscillation between the two, and Garbo is unable to actually find a way out of this binary. Then they also discover that Garbo is pregnant, right? And Each man, sees his collective, his salvation in the child. Each man hopes that that he is the father of the child. Right? So that's why they actually need Garbo, because they are envious of the fact that she can produce a child, that she can procreate, and they themselves wish that they could procreate, but they can't. But they use the woman in this case as a medium through which they can pass on their own name. Right? So the function of the woman as someone who transmits patrimony from father to son. So the possibility of becoming a father to Garbo's child fills the men's lives with a new sense of purpose. And it's in this performance of pretense, when they actually begin to play each other, that they, as Intuk says, to be somebody else is a way of feeling alive for a little while at least. So they all want to pretend and be someone else because they don't know how to be themselves. What does it mean to be yourself? What does it mean to be true to yourself? Right? So what does it mean to be authentic? Right? And in fact, perhaps Garbo is the one who's trying to be the most authentic of these four characters, because she realizes that she acknowledges the fact that she's leading an inauthentic life as an actress. She's always pretending to be someone else. She is always trying to pretend and pass off and masquerade, right? And in fact, that's exactly what she does in the play, because she's also trying to masquerade as a mother, right? In fact, we realize later on that she doesn't have a child. She willingly aborted the child during a shoot when she was acting in a movie. She has an abortion. But initially she pretends as though she's bearing the child of these three men, and she gives the men a fake sense of reassurance, of hope. So it becomes clear from these conversations that the only way that a woman can enjoy instant morality is by being absolutely insensate. Right? She cannot have any desires of her own. She's purely a puppet in the hands of men, and she only reflects the power of men, right? The masculinity of men. So she is her father's daughter, and then she is a man's wife. So she never seems to have any sense of self-ownership as she's transmitted or exchanged between men. So that's the only way that she can be secure from any charges of social stigma. So she has no freedom of her own, and that's exactly what is being presented in these performances within the play, where, for example, she plays the daughter of a pious man, and she is being charged by Tatya, the pious neighbor, for being an absolutely disreputable woman who has seduced another man and then had his child, his illegitimate child. So she has to commit infanticide in a play. But they also realize that the three men in the play, that they have no escape. And there's no escape out of the filth that they live in. Right? The filth, of course, here refers to the effete, unproductive, death in life existence that they lead. Right? He says that when Garbo, who plays the girl in the performance within the play, is forced to commit infanticide, there's nothing left to look forward to. Right? Once the child is dead, you feel revolted. Intuk says, you think we are wallowing in filth. Fair enough. Can you show me a single place that is clean? Show me. There's nothing left. If we are wallowing in filth, there is no escape for us. We must continue to live in the same filth. And we will say this filth is beautiful. In order to render this filth endurable, we will have to make up new theories about beauty, a sort of aesthetics of filth and depravity. Right? So they feel that they cannot help the fact that they are completely subject to their own sexual desires, uncontrollable as it is, their own desire for their own greed for pleasure. But that greed for pleasure, right, is only an unsuccessful attempt to escape from their own degenerate, depraved lives. They don't see any way out of it. And then they're all wondering about who the child belongs to, who is the father of the child. And Garbo says, so you have talked the whole thing over, have you? The minute I become pregnant, I also become cheap. We'll allow ourselves to forget those days when you followed me around like dogs and couldn't do without me. Look here, I haven't come here to throw myself on your mercy. I don't want any help from you. I came here simply because I was feeling restless and uneasy. But today I've seen you in your true color. Remember one thing though, I could implicate all three of you in this if I wanted to. So don't think you can shrug off responsibility. So they don't want to take responsibility for the child, but the whole question of paternity is also a puzzle. Right? We don't know who the father of the child is. Right? Each one thinks that maybe hopes that he is the father of the child, but none of the men want to take responsibility for the child. So let us just continue with our discussion of Garbo. So you noticed in the that I was talking about how these three men in the play are not interested in taking responsibility for the child that Garbo is apparently carrying. And they don't know at that point in the end of the first act that Garbo has aborted the child, right? So they don't want to take responsibility for the child, but they still want to have enjoy the privilege of transmitting their name as the father through the child, and they believe that Garbo is their only source of hope, of novelty, of creating something new from their life of filth. And they're all desperate to actually be the father of the child, and for Garbo to actually carry the child to term, but they don't realize that she has aborted the child. And so at the end of the first act, there is the three men imploring Pansy, imploring Garbo to have the child, and Intuk says, for example, we will all humble ourselves before him. Of course, assuming that the child is a boy, he'll be our creation, and we will bow our heads before our own creation. Right? So you see the kind of the narcissism of these men who want to create something, create a child through Garbo. And he says later, a single smile from him will move us. Garbo, let us do this. We are doomed people. We have neither seen nor experienced nor created anything beyond filth. So this is the one opportunity they have, they believe, to create something which is authentic, something which is original, something which will redeem their life of filth. Let us grab this opportunity. It's our only hope, our only chance. We will create something beautiful out of this filth. The world will know that there is a life somewhere which is beautiful, pure, fearless, innocent. And Garbo, we cannot achieve this without you. Do you know? Do you know what a tremendous role you have to play? And then Garbo says, here, don't you go loading me with new responsibilities. And then Garbo says, of course I do. I do feel the immensity of this thing. It's very beautiful and all that, to be a mother of a beautiful thing. But do we have the guts to see the whole thing through? Suppose we suddenly get cold feet. And there are all the other difficulties. If we decide on this, I'll lose nearly a year. And all my contracts will have to be cancelled one after the other. And so on and so forth. So she's more concerned about her career as an actor. What if she loses all her contracts that she's signed with film directors? What if she loses her job over her child? And at this point, she still hasn't revealed the fact that she has aborted the child. And so Garbo is the one who constantly reminds them of the hypocrisy of motherhood and fatherhood, institutions like motherhood and fatherhood in the family, right? And she is quite happy being a woman who flits from one man to another. And she also reminds the men that that they are just illusioning, that they're only holding on to their own illusions. If they think that this child is going to redeem their life, then they're obviously deluding themselves. They're actually convinced, they're actually determined to lead a life of illusions. And every man seems to hang on to these illusions of self-ownership, of masculinity, of security to actually enable themselves to lead a very secure life. And so towards the end, the three men actually perform a small little dance which basically reinstates their hope of collective salvation through the child. So Intuk tells Garbo that a new life is beckoning you. Don't reject it. It's our only chance. Garbo, this is our only refuge, our only chance to create something beautiful. You are life itself. We will do anything for you. You only have to say the word. We'll do it. Okay. And then towards the end of the first act, Srimant, Intuk and Pansy together say, you are life and the root of all life, the spring of fearless beauty, the source of all hope, the fulfillment of all promises are you. You are the beginning of belief. You are the everlasting. All future suns are in your womb. Give us your light. Give us your sun. He will burn up darkness and destroy it. Retribution in the face of injustice. compassion in the face of suffering, sympathy in the face of calamity, courage in the face of death. This he will be creation out of destruction. Mother, mother, mother. So this, of course, is a play that in some sense is also attacking the patriarchal construction of women as either divine mother who reproduces, who procreates, who's the source of all creation, the source of all redemption and hope, and on the other hand also someone who is woman as whore, as loose whore, as somebody who moves on from man to man and makes every man feel terribly insecure because they are unable to actually possess the woman, right? So this is constant binary between the two, and the woman is trapped between these two constructions of womanhood. In Act 2 again, you see an elaboration of these male sense of desperation, the way they hold on to Garbo as their only source of hope and redemption. And then towards the later on in the second act is where Garbo reveals the fact that she aborts the child during a shoot at the setting, and the men are completely disillusioned again, that they now have absolutely no hope to actually redeem their own lives. There's no way out of the filth, that they actually go back to living extremely meaningless and sterile lives. And then so here Garbo, for example, on page 48 of Act 2, she says, "Oh dear, how he worries. There were many people with me." This is when she describes the scene when she is shooting a scene and how she aborted the child. This, of course, is a suggestion that she willingly did it. She willingly aborted the child to get rid of the child so that doesn't hamper her freedom, her career, but also perhaps to avenge herself against these men who have been charging her with obscenities, with abuses, right? They did everything they could for me. Shooting was stopped for 8 days. They were all eaten up with anxiety for me, poor things. The director was almost on the point of tears. Poor thing. He's such a kid. It was during a camel race. He said he would never have included this shot had he known about me. Poor chap felt terribly guilty. He kept insisting it was entirely his fault. But honestly, even I didn't think it would happen. All that jogging up and down on the camel. So unnecessary. They could have used my double. But I was so excited. I'm playing the role of a Lamani girl. She's the second heroine. It's a character role. She's terribly fiery and terribly passionate, this Lamani girl, and terribly beautiful. They could have used my double, but I just didn't think. Why aren't you talking? Don't you believe me? Right? And so they just don't believe her initially when she says that she aborted the child during a camel race. But initially later on they realize that they have no choice but to believe her, that there is now no source of hope. So Intuk says later, let's return to filth. The world we decided was not for us, could never have been. We were idiots out to turn dreams into reality. Let's go back to our old world now, the world of filth, as a punishment and as a sort of consolation too. Right? So it's consoling to go back to a world of illusions. Right? What is this world of filth? A world where you create illusions in order to escape from the fact of being utterly isolated in a world which has no meaning. Right? Pansy wants to go with Garbo. Right? Initially, Pansy has this great sense of veneration towards Garbo, whom he thinks of as a mother figure, and he wants to go with her. But then, when he realizes that she has aborted the child, he also turns against her and he begins to abuse her. And Shrimant is unwilling to actually let go of Pansy, and now we realize at this point in the second act that Shrimant possesses Pansy, with whom he also wants to have a sexual relationship, and so this also reveals his failed masculinity and the fact that he wants to conceal the fact that he is probably a homosexual. So this comes out towards the end of the second act. So when Pansy says that he wants to go and stay with Garbo, Shrimant says, no, he cannot leave us now. Once he has been with us, part of our world, he just can't get up and go, leaving us high and dry. He cannot back out now. Pansy, you will just suffocate in that poverty-stricken place of your parents, walls blackened by smoke and a harassed mother, unpressed clothes and meager meals. That's all you'll get. You'd better stay here. Our life is more beautiful, much more beautiful. And Intuk says, Don't use that word again, Srimant. We are at war with it, with the very concept it represents. Where is beauty? Is there any? It's just a figment of the imagination, a sort of mirage, a trap. I'm tired of struggling within it. We are free now. Filth, that is the only truth. We are free now to choose it. Let's choose it, make it our own, and live with it. We are honest people. So now Intuk at this point wishes to actually lead an authentic life finally by actually choosing to live with filth, choosing to live to acknowledge the fact that they lead disillusioned lives in an isolating city. Right. So I think the only path, the only possibility of authenticity perhaps here for these men is to actually accept the fact that they are inauthentic, that they are imperfect, that they are failed men, and that there's no redemption, there's no way out of it. Right. In fact, Intuk also realizes that when he acknowledges the fact that he is not an original poet or a writer, that a lot of his writings, all his writings, are in some sense derivative and of other ideas, of other people's ideas. They're only plagiarized, they're only borrowed. Intuk says later on, who are these invisible powers ranged against us? There's only one way to face them now, Garbo. Either we turn and fight those who wish to fight against us, or we gore ourselves bloody before they get a chance to inflict the first blow. We will choose the second way. You didn't believe what I said that day, but it is true. These powers desire to crush us and force us into filth. But before they can, let us throw ourselves headlong into it. Let us create our own world in filth, and then the very winds blowing over us will turn our enemies black and blue with their rotten, hate-filled breath. We cannot avoid these antagonists now. They are our eternal foes. We need to become very powerful. That is more rotten, more perverse, corroded with hatred. Right? So they need to embrace their own filth in order to actually show how perverse they can actually be. Right? It's almost like it's a perverse move to actually embrace one's own utter lack of authenticity, utter lack of, of being absolutely disillusioned with life and acknowledging the fact that you're disillusioned. And Srimant now just wants to have kind of a mechanical and rather violent and aggressive sexual relationship with Pansy and with Garbo, now that she cannot produce children anymore, or she's incapable of procreating, that he wants to have a relationship with her, a relationship that would only reinforce the sterility of his life. In fact, his own sterility, the fact that he is a failed man, right? He's a model of failed masculinity. And Pansy is, of course, doesn't want to be bought by Srimant's wealth or by his power. So he really wants to actually leave him, and then he's the one who actually reveals the fact that Srimant is an impotent man. Srimant also finally confesses that he is a failure. He tells Garbo that, are you angry with me? But this is how it is. Why? Tell them if you like. Tell them. What's the point of hiding anything now? I stand naked before you. Tell them everything. I'm a flop in her bed these days. Do you know that? Utter flop. You know it now. Now let me have it. Use your scorn, your ridicule. You'll never understand it, Garbo, he says again. It's a terrible thing. You're the only one who's never laughed at me. Barbie laughed. Shireen actually spat. These are women that Srimant has been with. There was a time when I could tire these girls out night and night and still have more to give. He's also on drugs and injections, right? So which has actually completely undermined his sexual prowess. And so he no longer has this kind of sexual reputation that he had earlier. And the fact that now he realizes that for the longest time, the only thing that actually mattered to him in life was money and the body. And he wasn't interested in anything else. He says, I was never fond of reading or art or studies or anything. Only things of the flesh. All I had was my body. That was the only truth, right? And there was no other alternative but to go on believing in it. And now it's my body that has let me down. I wanted that child. It would have borne my name. People would never have known about me then. He realizes that until then that the only thing that actually possessed any reality for him was the body and the flesh. And so he thought that he could actually acquire an authentic sense of self through sex, the sexual act, through the body, and by becoming a father. But then now he realizes that even they were false constructions, that there was no truth to them, and that there's no way now that he can actually redeem himself, but to actually confess, to acknowledge even to himself that he has led a lie of a life. And so, which is why Srimant then begins to beg Pansy, saying that he's the only one who can actually give him back his body. Women are of no use to me now, but he has nothing but contempt for me. Right? So, he still thinks, he still holds on to the fantasy that the sexual act is the only way that he can actually get a validation of himself. But then, neither is Pansy nor Garbo willing to give him that sense of validation. So Pansy says, like a spoilt child, I'll kill myself. Garbo, if he hadn't, referring to Srimant, if he hadn't come to the station unexpectedly like that, I'd really have committed suicide that day. I don't like my parents one bit. Out of all my brothers and sisters, I was the one they disliked. I was the middle one, that's why. Well, not really disliked, but I just don't love them. I love only you, Garbo. Truly. Do you think my running away upset them in any way? Do you think they bothered to make any inquiries about my whereabouts after I had gone? Not even an ad in the papers. I saw the railway line gleaming in the sun, and I thought I'd like to kill myself. I have no one of my own. Srimant has been making a nuisance of himself, and you are nice to me only when it pleases you. It was you who first said you'd take me to your flat, Garbo. Right? So he again is very childlike, hoping that Garbo will be his only source of hope and comfort, but he realizes that even Garbo has been using him for her own pleasure. So everyone seems to be corrupted by their own illusions of perfection, of self-ownership, of security, and that's what they seem to realize towards the end of the play, when no one seems to belong to anyone. No one has any claim on anybody. Everyone seems to be equally damaged and completely lost in their own world of isolation and alienation and corruption. Even Garbo realizes that all that remains is the body, right? In fact, because since she also uses her own body to act and to actually fulfill the desires and pleasures of the men that she's with, she realizes that even Pansy has been corrupted to the core. Because he was an orphan, I mean, he left his parents behind at least. He abandoned them, and all that remained for him was the body. And that's the only thing that these men had to look forward to was the child. And Garbo says there's no other chance of me conceiving again. She can't have another child after she lost the baby. And so now Intuk embraces Garbo, saying that she can now become a part of their world, which is incapable of creating anything. Right? It's a sterile world. And this is also when Intuk confesses to Garbo that none of his poems are his, that they all seem to be derivative poems drawing from the ideas of others, that they completely lack any sort of originality. And now, since Garbo has also been de-idealized, has been dethroned from the ideal, Intuk's ideals, that she can no longer actually inspire him to produce something new. Garbo also seems rather disillusioned. She says, I will not be happy with anybody now. It's too late for all that, too late for happiness, for love. That is never to be. The mind has grown too calculating. If ever I feel a momentary tenderness for anybody, the mind rears its head and hisses, are you in your senses? You are playing with fire. You know what suffering will follow. And what will you gain in return for all the suffering and the risk? Anything of value? And so on and on. Is there anything to be gained out of such exaggerated cautiousness? Making a million abstractions to get something. I can't cope with this anymore. I am a low woman of no importance. Why do you burden me with impossible significance? It is not fair. Right? So she realizes that she has become extremely deliberate and calculated in her movements. She's completely lost any kind of spontaneity. She doesn't seem to feel anything called happiness or love. She's become someone who constantly calculates and measures, human beings and their gestures. So she doesn't seem to trust herself anymore, in fact. Intuk says that all his poems are all phony, that there's nothing original about them. And that's when Intuk decides to never write again. He says that that's the most honest an authentic decision he's made is to never actually write again. That, in some sense, is that moment of authenticity when you confess, when you acknowledge to yourself that there is nothing original in this world. There's nothing new to be produced. And Garbo says, I'd starve to death if I stopped acting, right? She says that the only way for me to continue facing the cameras again and again with phony postures and gestures, that's the only way. She can only survive if she continues to pretend before cameras. I sometimes feel I should have got married. I have no hopes left of ever doing a really challenging role. I've grown dry like bark of dead wood, waiting for a role or love to come my way. It is too late. Too late. Never again will I put forth tender green leaves. Do you remember the first time we met? We talked for hours. It was wonderful, but the wonder of it soon faded, and all we were left was our bodies. There are times when I feel a deep down restlessness. This is what my life has been, and now I'm growing old and I'm left with nothing. Inch by inch, I've lost ground without gaining anything. Who will marry me now? When Intuk offers to get married to Garbo, Garbo says, who will marry me now? Men who danced around me 2 years ago are now at the most willing to have me as a keep. So I think a lot of the play has to do with what it means to become more and more familiar with the world, familiar with the ways of people, familiar with sexual desire, to the point of being absolutely jaded and bored of it, right? So there's no novelty and newness left. The more we live, the longer we live, the more we get familiar and inured and accustomed to the ways of life, and then to the point that there's nothing new to be experienced, nothing new to be felt. And I think it's this deadening sense of sterility, of immobility, and of the utter lack of life which the play constantly seems to focus on. And so Garbo says that there's no one who is now willing to marry her because she has become stale to the men around her. Right, after more than two or three encounters, nobody seems to be interested in her. Perhaps Pansy will marry me, is what she says. And then she even quotes the director who said that, who's just a kid, but he says that Garbo is now even less desirable than an ordinary starlet. Your Garbo is nothing but an illusion you have built for yourselves. That's what Garbo tells the three men, that she's nothing but an illusion that the three men have built in order to actually survive themselves. The only way in which they can live is to actually think of Garbo as an aesthetic ideal, an illusion of hope, of redemption, of life itself. Intuk says, if it's an illusion, we wish to keep it intact, else it would be difficult to live. Srimant, why live? Intuk, because we don't have the guts to kill ourselves. What will happen to us when we give up our bodies? Would you be able to commit suicide? Right? So they're only left with their bodies which seem to lack any kind of significance. That's the only thing which they have, is just a brute body, a physical matter which seems to have no significance whatsoever. Intuk, do me a favor, kill me, Srimant says. Pansy, you're already dead. Garbo, how cruel he's become. Intuk, and he will grow worse as youth advances, and then suddenly one day he'll realize with a shock that he too has started slithering through mud. Nobody escapes ultimate disillusionment. Garbo, why do you need delusions? Don't you wish you could throw them all off and breathe freely? Intuk, I used to think that way myself, but that's not the way. We need these chains to hold us. We don't feel free with their falling off, just lonely. As our illusions fade one by one, our loneliness increases. So it's that sense of loneliness which I think the play constantly harps on, that everyone seems to have, possess this fiction called identity. They identify themselves through their ties with other people, right? But people find it absolutely impossible, almost impossible, to stand alone, to be absolutely comfortable with their loneliness, and to live, according to their own values. Is it possible for an individual, to be absolutely individuated? Or are individuals at some very fundamental level interrelated to other individuals? Right? So it seems to be this constant play between individuals, between the interrelationships between individuals, and the utter isolation and loneliness that every individual does feel in their life when they give up all the illusions, they give up all their ties, they give up all their that very sense of identity that marks their life. So is it possible to actually be beyond identity, beyond not reduce oneself, and actually to be beyond one's ties with other people? So we actually end up with the body, is what Garbo says. There's no illusion there. Shriman says, kill me, kill me. Is this how life has always been into castes? For thousands of years, people have been born and have been dying. Like worms, bodies beget bodies, which wiggle and swarm for a while, turn rigid and die. I'm sick of the whole thing. Even art becomes an illusory thing. What art can worms create? Nothing genuine seems to grow out of me. If something does come up, it is stunted, diseased. Instead of growing, its leaves drop off. What can I write? It is not just leaves dropping, it is a root that is rotten. There was a time when I pranced about like a Moharam tiger, proclaiming myself to be an artist. It was a sad delusion. So, you see that utter irredeemable sense of corruption that invades their life like a disease, that they're unable to actually create something new, and everything seems to be an absolute illusion. Even art itself, the very artistic production itself is rife with corruption. It's an illusory thing, which is only a signal of their stunted growth. It's diseased. Intuk again later on goes on to say that they're all fake, that they're all, in some sense, they'll all end their lives on a note of self-deception. They've all deceived themselves. They've all deceived themselves into thinking that they can actually they're capable of producing something great. But that seems to be an ever-receding dream, which is never fulfilled. And then later on, Intuk says that if the body is the only truth, let's stick to it and make life beautiful. Right? So they think that the only thing that's true, the only thing which is left when one gives up the chains of illusion of greatness is the body, right? And so therefore again the play seems to end on a note of sexual fulfillment, sexual happiness, right, through the body. But then that again is not something which is going to give these men what they want, right? It's not going to enable them to transcend their limited selves, their illusions, and to actually acquire a deep sense of union with the other. That sense of identity that comes with the sexual act is never promised. It never happens, right? And they only end up being as isolated as they were before. Intuk, Pansy and Shriman now think that perhaps Garbo is a part of their world because she is barren. She has grown barren like them, right? So she's part of their world. But then Garbo does not want to belong to that world, right? She's not. She wants to survive. Right? So which is why she actually wants to continue pretending before the camera, because she has to survive. So it's not like as though Garbo is free of her illusions either. But she does acknowledge the fact that that in the face of life and death, she has to continue acting. Garbo says that I cannot be part of you. I wish you'd all kill me instead. And that's exactly what happens. Towards the end of the play, Shriman stabs Garbo and she ends her life and she's murdered. But then when they see the blood is real, but Garbo was false. Right? So it's interesting that the physical body, the biological body, possesses a life of its own, and that is apparent when they stab her and she bleeds. But then in the place of the real body, the biological body, Garbo has disappeared. Right? The fiction called Garbo has disappeared. Garbo reveals towards the end of the play that she insisted on doing the sequence in the film by herself, even though the director was willing to use a dummy for the race sequence. I wanted to punish him. He didn't come to my tent, Garbo says. I went to his one night when I wanted a role in his next film. He sniggered. He laughed at me. I couldn't bear it. He'd been like that from the beginning, taking every opportunity to insult me. And when I wanted to win him over, do you know what he said? He pointed at the camels and said, "Go to them, that's what you want." I didn't even have a second heroine's role. I was playing the aging elder sister. I had about 3 scenes to do. When I did the camel scene, my entire body was being churned up. And I kept praying, let it happen, oh God, let it happen. And it did. When I felt the warm blood streaming down, I screamed, now let me see, just let me see his miserable face. When I came to, there was nobody but a huge, coarse woman near me. I asked her where the director was. She said, he's shooting. They found somebody to replace you, right? And that's when she reveals that she has willingly aborted the child. And so that's when these 3 men realize that she has deceived them from the very beginning. And so Intuk says, Garbo, go away, you've cheated me. You are dead to me. And Garbo says, "You deceived yourself. You should never have expected so much out of me. I'm an ordinary woman of flesh and blood. You burdened me with all sorts of imaginary virtues. I carried on for as long as I could, but I couldn't keep up the pretense forever. That doesn't mean I've done any wrong. And anyway, who are you to make demands on me?" So this is Garbo's last rejoinder when she reminds them that they are the ones who constructed her they're the one who projected their fantasies onto Garbo. Right? She was an ordinary woman of flesh and blood. And that's when they all kill her. Pansy calls her a whore, and Srimant stabs her and realizes that the Garbo was false. In her place is the physical body of Garbo. So you look at the way the play constructs a certain ideology of femininity, which constantly oscillates between the real and the representational, between the biological body and what the body stands for in terms of ownership, in terms of self-ownership, self-validation for the man. And that's exactly how patriarchy as an ideology works in the play, which basically constructs a woman as someone who is wedged between two extremes, two binaries of either being a promiscuous whore who can never give any single man a sense of self validation, because for a woman like Garbo, men are substitutable. So there's nothing unique or about any relationship that she has with a man. And on the other hand, she's also being projected as an aesthetic ideal, as an ideal of infinity, which these men all aspire to acquire, achieve, attain. And towards the end, when Garbo reveals the fact that she purposely aborted the child to punish the director, they all feel deceived, and that's how their lives end, on that note of self-deception. When they stab her, they realize that they've only stabbed their own illusions of her, right? All the while long they wanted to believe that she was their only hope, their only source of redemption, their only objective source of validation. But that, of course, ends on this note of deception. So in the next session, we will be discussing another play by Mahesh L. Kanchwar, which is called The Old Stone Mansion. Thank you.